everybody, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I, of course, am just another heavy metal maniac, and today I am doing another discography ranking. Today I'm going to be going over all 13 studio albums from none other than Swedish metal legends, the pioneers of epic doom themselves, Candlemass. Candlemass are one of my all-time favorite bands, probably in my, I want to say, top 10 favorite bands of all time. I absolutely adore this band. And this was a difficult discography to rank because this band is very consistent. There's a couple albums that are definitely not as strong as some of their other albums, but for the most part they are consistently awesome. Big, heavy, doomy riffs, epicness for days, darkness for days, sorrow for days. Yep, I absolutely love this band, and I'm going to be going over all of their studio albums today. So without further ado, enough of my ramblings, let's just get right into the ranking. Starting off, of course, with number 13, dead last, it is their album Dactylis Glomerata, released in 1998. This album is definitely an oddity in Candlemass's catalog. This is one of the most different sounding Candlemass albums, and that's not necessarily a good thing in my opinion. So, a couple things to note. First of all, this wasn't even supposed to be a Candlemass album originally. Leif Edling, who of course is the bass player and the principal songwriter behind Candlemass, he put together this different lineup for a band he called Abstract Algebra, which featured Bjorn Flodkvist on vocals. I hope I'm saying his name right. And it also features Michael Amott, who you know of course from Arch Enemy, Carcass, Carnage, and I believe a couple other projects as well. So he put together this band called Abstract Algebra, and he made this album, and he was originally supposed to release it as an Abstract Algebra album. However, due to label interference, I believe they were on Music for Nations when the album was made, but I could be wrong. The label was like, again, this is a classic tale. We talked about this, something similar in my Black Sabbath ranking. An artist wants to put out a solo album or a project under a different name. Label's like, hey, we can't really market this as whatever, so release it under your band name. So this was released as a Candlemass album. This album is kind of more of like a psychedelic, kind of spacey stoner rock slash stoner metal type album. This isn't really epic doom. It's just kind of very, it's very spacey. It's trippy and weird. The guitars are fuzzier. Gone are kind of the epic. Gone is like the epic theatrical feel that you would normally associate with Candlemass, and it's just, again, this kind of more psychedelic type thing. While this album I don't think is terrible or anything, it's not a Candlemass album to me. I like other bands that like do this style, but this kind of psychedelic, spacey stoner metal type thing is not something I want out of a Candlemass album. It's something I would go to other bands for. So yeah, that's why it lands at number 13 for me. Again, it wasn't even supposed to be a Candlemass album originally. It was just called Candlemass because of label interference, and it doesn't feel like a Candlemass album to me, so that's why it lands at number 13. Coming in now at number 12, it is from the 13th Sun, released in 1999. This is basically a continuation of Dactylis Glomerata. No Michael Amott on this album. He left after Dactylis Glomerata. This is also the final album to feature Bjorn Flodkvist on the vocals, and like I said, this is pretty much a continuation of Dactylis Glomerata. So for me, it is pretty much interchangeable. The reason I have it ranked higher, though, is because there is one song on this album that I really do like, and that's the song Taut, which is this very dark, very moody piece, but to me that's like the most traditional Candlemass sounding song on this album. Yeah, this is pretty much the same thing again. It's more spacey, fuzzy, psychedelic, kind of maybe arguably more progressive as well. Stoner rock, stoner metal. I believe actually in the liner notes for this album when it was released, it said somewhere in the liner notes wherever, this album is dedicated to the greatest band of all time, Black Sabbath. So it's kind of cool, like this, you could definitely hear the Sabbath energy on this album for sure. But again, this is not really epic doom. This doesn't feel like a Candlemass album, and again, it's not terrible. I don't think Dactylis Glomerata or From the 13th Sun are bad albums. just to me, they're not Candlemass albums. They don't feel like Candlemass albums. Other than the song Taut, both of these albums are albums I'm not going to really return to if I want Candlemass. So yeah, From the 15th Sun, for me, it's number 12. Not a bad album again, it's just, this just doesn't feel like a Candlemass album to me. Coming in now at number 11, it is Chapter 6, released in 1992. I'm not sure why this album is called Chapter 6. This is their 5th studio album, so I don't know, unless it's a reference to something, I'm not really sure why this album is called Chapter 6. This was their final album before the Candlemass initially broke up in 1994. This is also the only album to feature Thomas Vikstrom on the vocals. Again, I hope I'm saying his name right. This album is definitely different sounding, but it feels more like traditional Candlemass as opposed to the two I mentioned previously. Although in this album I feel like there's a much more, obviously this band was heavily inspired by Black Sabbath. There's always been Sabbath energy in this band. But to me there's more prominent Sabbath vibes on this album. There's, you know, the riffs kind of feel much more Black Sabbath inspired. There's also more prominent usage of keyboards on this album. The keyboards are much more noticeable. This album kind of has a bit of a more power metal-y vibe at points. Like, especially in Thomas Vikstrom, his vocals, he kind of has kind of a power metal-ish delivery. And again, the keyboards, it kind of has a more power metal. It's not like full-blown power metal, but it definitely has kind of stronger power metal vibes in a lot of the songs. And there are some good songs in here. Like, I think Dying Illusion is a pretty good song. Where the Runes Still Speak is a really good song, I think. Ebony Throne isn't bad, but to me there aren't as many tracks that really jump out at me on this album. This album didn't do super well, but just kind of why they initially broke up. Just because, you know, this album did underperform. It didn't sell very well. It didn't chart at all. So yeah, but I think this album is still pretty good. It's just number 11 for me because I think they wrote much stronger albums than this one. But this is still a decent album for sure. Coming in now at number 10, it is Sweet Evil Sun, which was released in 2022. This is their newest studio album to date. I do like this album, so it kind of does, I don't know, it does maybe hurt a little bit seeing it at number 10. And of course it is, especially since it is their newest album. I didn't want to rank it this low. It just kind of landed for me at number 10, whereas, because even though I do really like this album, it doesn't jump out at me as much as some of the other albums do. I think they still wrote some really killer songs on here. Black Butterfly is a really great song. Scandinavian Gods, I think, is a pretty good song. Devil Voodoo, Goddess, I think, is pretty good. This is, of course, the third album to feature Johan Lundqvist on the vocals, which his voice has definitely aged since he sang on the band's first album, but I think he puts in a very solid performance here. Of course, you know, the riffs are all great. I think this album does sound good on a production standpoint. It's just number 10 for me just because there aren't as many tracks that really jump out at me. It feels a bit kind of like Candlemass by numbers a little bit. Like, it doesn't feel like they were really super inspired when they made this album, but I still think it is a good album. It's just, for me, it's number 10 just because, like I said, this band is very consistent. So at a certain point, it's just like assigning numbers to albums. I've said this before on multiple rankings, but you know, when you're dealing with bands like this, it's difficult to rank these albums. Sweet Evil Sun, though, for me, it's number 10. I still like it, it's just number 10. Coming in now at number 9, it is Psalms for the Dead, which was released in 2012. This was their third and final album to feature Robert Lowe on the vocals. Of course, Robert Lowe from another band I love quite a lot, Solitude Aeternus. Yeah, again, this is pretty much the same situation as Sweet Evil Sun. I think this album is really good. It's just lower on my list. I think The Sound of Dying Demons is an awesome song. Dancing in the Temple of the Mad Queen Bee, I think is really good. I like the song Water Witch, The Lights of Thebe, I don't know how to say that word. That's a cool song. Title track on this album is pretty good. I would say maybe Black as Time, the final song, the kind of spoken word parts are kind of feel a little goofy to me. That's really kind of the only complaint I have about this album. Otherwise, this is a really solid album. It's got great production. Again, Robert Lowe, I love Robert Lowe. I think he's an amazing vocalist. He sounds absolutely amazing. He's probably my second favorite vocalist this band ever had. second only to another vocalist, which we'll get to. Yeah, Songs for the Dead. Again, this is a really solid album. It's one I would return to. It's just number 9 for me because there's other albums I like more. Coming in now at number 8, it is The Door to Doom, which was released in 2019. This was actually their longest gap in between studio albums because this was the album that came out after Songs for the Dead. So yeah, it's a 7-year gap between albums, which is the longest gap they've had in releases. This was their first album with Johan Lenkeviest on the vocals since their 1986 debut. So yeah, this was kind of a cool bit, kind of a reunion. And yeah, this is a really solid album in my opinion. There's some really killer songs on here. Splendor, Demon, Majesty is a great opener. Under the Ocean is honestly, I think, one of the best Candlemass songs that has ever been written. I think it's one of their best songs out of their whole career. Astoralus, the Great Octopus, features none other than the great Tony Iommi doing a guest spot. Death's Wheel is a really good song. Black Trinity. Again, this is a really solid album. Like I said, Johan's vocals, they've definitely aged, but I think he does sound really good. He puts in a really solid performance on this album. Yeah, The Door to Doom, I think this is a solid album. It's doomy. It's got a great blend of, those slower, just heavy, Sabbath-y riff songs. You got some more kind of mid-tempo stuff on here. I think this is a really good album. It's just number 8 for me. It's kind of more middle of the pack just because, again, there's other albums that I think are better, but I would happily jam this album again. Number 7 on my list is Death, Magic, Doom, which was released in 2009. This was the second album with Robert Lowe on the vocals. Again, I think he sounds really, really great. Again, some absolutely killer songs on here. I love Hammer of Doom. Yeah, that song is killer. The Bleeding Baroness, is a really good song. House of a Thousand Voices is killer. Dead Angel, I think, is really good. My Funeral Dreams is kind of a more somber way to end the album. I think that song is awesome. Yeah, pretty much the same deal as the last couple. I do really, really dig this album. It's just, for me, it's kind of more middle of the road. It's number 7. There's songs in here that I absolutely love, and yeah, the title of this album is pretty, yeah, it makes sense. It's got Doom, it's got magic for sure, it's got death. It's not death metal, but it's got stuff to do with death in the lyrics for sure. Yeah, this is a really killer album. I like the production on it. I like the production on, like, all their modern albums. I think all their modern albums sound really good. They're modern, but they're not, like, overly polished. The guitars are just heavy. The drums are punchy. This is an awesome album. Again, it's just number 7 for me, just because there's a few that I like more, but I would happily jam this album again, because I do really dig this album for sure. Coming in now at number 6, it is King of the Grey Islands, which was released in 2007. This was their first album to feature Robert Lowe on the vocals. I love the guitar tone on this album. The guitars are thick and crunchy, and they are so freaking heavy. This album kind of has a real kind of dark and moody vibe that I dig, which Candlemass is obviously known for a dark and moody vibe, but this album definitely has that in spades. And this is my favorite album of the Robert Lowe era of Candlemass. I think this is maybe his best vocal performance, but he sounds great on all 3 albums he's on. Emperor of the Void is a great way to start the album once you get past the little intro. Devil's Seed is a really cool song. Of Stars and Smoke is pretty killer as well. Destroyer, I think, is a really awesome song. Man of Shadows is killer too, and I really love the big long closer, Embracing the Sticks. That's a really, really awesome song. Yeah, like I said, King of the Grey Islands. This is a pretty damn killer album. My favorite of the Robert Lowe era. Yeah, it's number 6. Just because there's a few more that I like more. But it's still ranking high. So just because it is a killer album. My number 5 choice is their self-titled album, which was released in 2005. This, to me, is like one of the all-time great metal comeback albums. This was the first true Candlemass album since Chapter 6, since 1992. Because again, Dactylis Glomerata and 13th Son are not really Candlemass albums in my opinion. But yeah, this is an absolutely killer album. This would be their first album with Messiah Marcolin on the vocals since 1989. This would also be their last album together, which I guess they were just never really meant to be, after all. I love the production of this album. It's kind of more modern, but it's not overly polished. It's still very heavy. A lot of these songs kind of more like a bit of a classic metal vibe on some of these songs, which I think kind of gives them a cool edge. Black Dwarf is a great song. Seven Silver Keys is a really good song as well. What else? Witches. Born in a Tank is one of the more mid-tempo songs. That song is really good. Spellbreaker is awesome, and The Day and the Night is really killer as well. Yeah, like I said, this to me is one of the all-time great comeback albums. This is easily my favorite Candlemass album, post-classic Candlemass era. I love this album. This is, again, it's absolutely awesome. I don't like it as much as some of their like classic stuff, but this is still like an amazing album. It's number 5. It's in the top, made it to the top 5. The Messiah, his voice again aged a little bit, because he was super young when he did the vocals on the first albums he was on. But yeah, he still sounds really good, and I love this album. The self-titled album for me lands at number 5. Alright, now we are entering their classic era, and to me, these next 4 might as well all be tied for being number 1. But coming in at number 4 is Ancient Dreams, which was released in 1988. This was their 3rd album, their 2nd album to feature Marcolin on the vocals. Interesting thing to note, this was their only album to chart in the US. This was their only album to chart on the Billboard 200. This album made it to number 174 on the Billboard 200. Again, this is the only time they charted in the US, which I think is pretty interesting. Yeah, this album is just incredible. It's big, it feels just so grand and lavish. It still sounds awesome from a production standpoint. The guitars are thick and crunchy and heavy, and all the riffs are amazing, and there's so many. I love pretty much every song on this album. Mirror Mirror is a banger. A Cry from the Crypt and Darkness in Paradise are 2 of my favorites off this album. I love the riff on Bearer of Pain. That riff has been stuck in my head since like the first time I heard it. I also think the title track is really awesome. They also do a cover of a Carl Bellman classical piece, which is pretty cool, I think. Yeah, again, this is an absolutely killer album. It's just, again, these next 4 are pretty much all tied for being my number 1. It just kind of lands at number 4 just because there's a few albums that I think are maybe slightly better, but again, I love the riffs. I love every song on this. Messiah, his amazing vocals, he sounds amazing. He is my favorite vocalist this band had for sure. But he sounds absolutely incredible, and he's 20 years old when he did this. Like, he does not sound like a 20-year-old kid. He sounds like a 30-year-old man, but it's amazing. He sounds awesome. Ancient Dreams, it's my number 4. I absolutely love this album. Number 3 now, it is their 1986 debut, Epicus, Doomicus, Metallicus. Now, how many bands can come out and say, yeah, we literally created an entire genre on our first album? This is a genre-defining album. It literally is, it's Epicus, Doomicus, Metallicus, epic doom metal. It perfectly describes what this album is. And again, they literally just came out and created an entire genre of metal. In 1986, there was really nothing that sounded like this. This was a time when metal was getting, thrash metal at this point had really taken off, and we were getting the early foundations of death metal and black metal. And this album, it came out as slower. It was honestly heavier. Like, the guitar tone on all Candlemass albums is heavy as shit. It was big, it was epic. This, of course, featured Johan on the vocals, and this would be his only album until The Door to Doom in 2019. And I think this album also sounds amazing from a production standpoint. For 1986, this sounds amazing, and even to this day, it really does not sound that dated at all, in my opinion. Solitude is, I think, the one Candlemass song everybody knows and loves. That song is absolutely incredible. It's one of their top 5 greatest songs they've ever written. It's like a top 5 greatest doom metal song of all time. Holy Solitude, what a way to open this album. Demon's Gate is amazing. A Crystal Ball, Honestly, Blackstone Wielder is probably my favorite song off this album, though. I just love that, again, that riff, that riff lives rent-free in my brain. A Sorcerer's Pledge is an amazing closer to this track. Closer to this album. There's only 6 tracks on this album. It does not overstay its welcome at all. All these songs are perfect. Some of them are pretty long. Like Demon's Gate is over 9 minutes long. Sorcerer's Pledge is 8 minutes long, but they do not bore me in the slightest. They manage to maintain my interest. And yeah, I absolutely love this album. Epicus, Doomicus, Metallicus, one of the greatest debuts of all time, not just in metal, in music, period. This is like, if you were to make a list of 1,000 albums you have to hear before you die, regardless of genre, this would 100% be on there, in my opinion. Epicus, Doomicus, Metallicus, it's number 3. I adore it. Alright, now number 2 on my list, it is Nightfall, released in 1987. This, of course, was their first album to feature a 19-year-old Messiah Marklin on the vocals, and he delivers an absolutely stellar, amazing performance. This album, to me, kind of took everything that was great about Epicus. Epicus was the foundation, the groundwork for all Candlemass albums to come. This album kind of took that and made it more, just kind of expanded on it. It makes it a lot more, this album feels much more theatrical, not only due to Messiah's more operatic vocals, to me, just the music itself. It feels larger, it feels more grand, it feels just more epic, to be blunt. This is the first album to feature interludes, which really kind of adds to the more theatrical atmosphere of this album. And again, there's some amazing songs on here. The Well of Souls is an amazing song. At the Gallows End is one of my favorite Candlemass songs ever. One of my favorite songs of all time, period. Samaritan, I love that song. Dark Are the Veils of Death. And of course, this features the great song Bewitched, which is not only an amazing song, but it is also the music video for it is just as iconic, with Messiah doing his ridiculous doom dance. And yeah, that music video was made for like a $5 budget adjusted for inflation, and I absolutely love it. Also features Dead from Mayhem as one of the background dancers, which I think is really cool, really neat piece of metal history right there. And also, I think the closing instrumental, Black Candles, it's short, but it's really epic and beautiful. I love it. Yeah, this is one of my favorite albums of all time, period. I absolutely love this album. It is, again, it's everything you want in Candlemass. This is kind of the perfect Candlemass album in a way. If someone was like, hey, what's Candlemass? I've never heard this band before, I'd be like, go listen to Nightfall, because I think by general consensus this might be regarded as this band's finest hour, and it's not hard to see why. For me, it's number 2 just because there's one that ever, just by like a millimeter, by a 1/1000th of a nanometer, edges it out by a little bit. My number 1 Candlemass album is Tales of Creation, released in 1989. My God, this album is fucking amazing. This was their final album with Messiah Marklin before he would leave and eventually come back for the self-titled. I love the production of this album. Like, the guitars, they're crunchy and they're very heavy, but there's kind of this warmth to this album that it feels kind of inviting in a way, but it still feels very, very heavy, very, very grand and epic. Dark Reflections is a great opener. It's a bit more up-tempo, but it's a great opener nonetheless. They actually re-record a song that was on Epicus here, Under the Oak, and I honestly, even though I think the original was really good, I honestly kind of prefer this re-recording a bit. This, to me, might be their heaviest album just for the guitar tone. The guitar tone on this album is just so freaking heavy. My God, and that riff on the re-recorded version of Under the Oak, that dun 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 dun, God, it's chuggy. Like, honestly, the guitar tone on this album is like heavier than most death metal bands. I'm just gonna say it. Tears is an amazing song. Into the Unfathomed Tower is one of my favorite instrumentals they've ever done. It's like, this band known for these very slow, big, doomy songs. They come up with this, honestly, barn burner, like Into the Unfathomed Tower, with this shreddy guitar shredding on top of it, and it's awesome. I love The Edge of Heaven as well. Somewhere in Nowhere is incredible. Sorry. And the closing track of Tale of Creation. Yeah, this album is absolutely incredible in my opinion. This is one of my top 10 favorite metal albums of all time. I adore this album. I love all the riffs. I love, again, I just love the atmosphere and the vibe of this album. Yeah, for me, Tales of Creation, it barely beats out Ancient Dreams, Epicus, and Nightfall as for being my number one. Again, by like 1/1000th of a nanometer, it beats out all of those. Again, my top 4 are pretty much tied, but man, Tales of Creation, this album just kind of speaks to me in a lot of ways, and I absolutely love it. One of my favorite albums of all time. And, well, that about does it. If you made it to the end of this video, you are awesome, and I appreciate you. Consider leaving a like if you enjoyed this video. Leave a comment down below. Tell me, what do you think of my rankings? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comments. Consider subscribing as well, because I do have a lot more content coming your way. And like I said, that about does it. I, of course, am just another Heavy Metal Maniac. Sorry, I'll see you all sometime in the future. In the meantime, all of you, take care and have a great day. So long.